Bully tied Big Shaq's daughter to a pole, thinking it was just a joke. But when the deputy director of the CIA looked up from those ropes, the joke ended. In one breath, power flipped, and the bully realized too late, this wasn't Big Shaq's daughter anymore. This was a reckoning with clearance. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The Florida sun stretched golden arms across the quiet town, a place where palm trees swayed softly against suburban streets, and neighbors knew each other by name. Shaquille O'Neal, or Big Shaq, as everyone called him, wasn't just a famous name here. He was the heart of the town. He towered over most, his massive frame a familiar sight at charity events, youth basketball games, and neighborhood barbecues. This was a man who could have shut himself away behind wealth and celebrity, but instead he chose to be everywhere, helping, smiling, connecting. Today was no different. Shaq moved with his easy grin through the local community center, his deep voice rumbling as he shared a laugh with Mrs. Doyle, the elderly woman he often helped with her grocery. He gave fist bumps to the kids shooting hoops outside, clapped the backs of local workers, and paused to take selfies with fans who still marveled at his larger-than-life presence. Shaq didn't need to do any of this, but he did, every day, because for him, love wasn't a brand, it was a responsibility. As he stepped outside, the sun caught his face just right, and for a moment, he closed his eyes, soaking it in. That familiar pull at his chest, that faint hum of family, made him think of Meera. His daughter was always in his mind, even when she wasn't in sight. She was his heart, his pride, and though she had grown into a strong, fiercely independent woman, she was still his little girl. What Shaq didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that Meera wasn't just the tall, poised young woman the town saw at local events, or walking their dogs in the park. She was living a double life, a life packed with secrets, stakes, and shadows. By the age of 23, she had already climbed into one of the most covert and critical roles in the country, deputy director at the CIA. Even Shaq, who knew her better than anyone, believed she worked in some federal administrative office, a vague cover she maintained to keep her family safe. That morning, Meera had kissed him on the cheek before slipping out, leaving him to his town rounds, while she quietly worked her second life. She had always been sharp, always driven, but she had also inherited her father's emotional core, a deep love for people, a relentless desire to protect, to lift, to serve. That was what made her so effective and so dangerous in her line of work. And today, without realizing it, she was walking straight into a trap she hadn't seen coming, not from international threats or covert enemies, but from something far more local, far more insidious. In another part of town, Carter Landon lounged lazily on the hood of his car, flipping a baseball in one hand. Carter was the kind of boy who had never been told no. Wealthy family, good looks, a life insulated by privilege. He and his crew, 3 other boys from local elite families, carried the casual arrogance of those who believed they were untouchable. They weren't hardened criminals. They were entitled pranksters, the kind who pushed lines for sport, laughing at the consequences because they believed none would come. Their latest fixation, Meera O'Neal. They saw her confidence, her striking beauty, her air of quiet authority, and it grated on them. Who did she think she was? Walking around like she was better, untouchable. Today, Carter had decided they were going to put her in her place, just for laughs, just for the rush of it, a harmless prank, they told themselves, nothing more. When they spotted her walking near the old football field, they acted. She was calm, headphones in, absorbed in her own thoughts. When they approached, all smirks and swagger. Come on, Meera. Just a joke. They chuckled as they corralled her. She remained composed, her pulse steady even as they tied her loosely to the old goalpost. They laughed, snapped photos, and joked about posting it to social media. Just some harmless fun. Just messing around. But beneath Meera's cool exterior, a razor-sharp mind was calculating, measuring, assessing. She didn't need to panic. She knew who she was, and what she was capable of. Her training had drilled into her the importance of reading people, of waiting for the right moment. She also knew that her father, Big Shaq, the man with the biggest heart she knew, would sense something long before the situation spun fully out of control. Back across town, Shaq felt it. A weight, a shift in the air. He had lived long enough, faced enough public and private battles, to trust his instincts. Meera wasn't answering her phone. That wasn't like her. He began moving with purpose, his usual casual pace sharpening, eyes flicking over the streets, over the people, looking for something, anything, out of place. He spoke quietly to a few neighbors, asking if they'd seen her, masking his rising worry with his usual calm tone. What Shaq didn't know yet was that the boy's prank wasn't just stupid, it was about to become a trigger for something far bigger. Meera's identity was classified, but situations like this had a way of unraveling secrets. One wrong move, one careless slip, and the entire town, maybe even the country, could be staring into a scandal they weren't prepared to handle. Shaq's thoughts raced as he moved from the community center to the nearby streets, retracing Meera's usual paths. He remembered raising her, remembered the looks people gave them when they walked into fancy restaurants or upscale shops. The subtle glances, the quiet assumptions. Racism wasn't always loud, he knew. Sometimes it was as soft as a smirk, as hidden as a joke. He had taught Meera to rise above, to carry herself with dignity, to be stronger than the small minds around her. But now the weight of fatherhood pressed down on him, tightening his chest. Where was she? Out on the field, the boys' laughter began to fade. Meera's stillness was unsettling. She didn't plead, didn't struggle. She simply watched them, eyes sharp, unafraid. Carter shifted uneasily, tossing the baseball from hand to hand. One of the boys, Greg, muttered that maybe they should untie her, that maybe this wasn't as funny as they thought. But Carter shook his head, brushing it off. They were just messing around, right? No harm, no foul. But harm was already blooming in the air, twisting into the sharp, invisible threads of consequence. Shaq's steps grew faster now. His phone pressed to his ear, calling out her name, asking people along the way. His heart thudded not with panic, but with a deep, pounding focus. He was a man who had faced the biggest arenas, the loudest crowds, but nothing compared to the arena of family. That was where his soul lived. That was where his fight burned. And somewhere just over the next hill, his daughter waited, still patient, unbroken, knowing that the day everything looked normal was the day it all was about to change. Carter Landon leaned back, against the hood of his shiny black SUV, a smug grin stretching across his face, as the Florida sun glinted off his designer sunglasses. His friends, Brent, Chase, and Tanner lounged nearby, laughing and tossing empty soda cans at each other, careless and loud. These boys were the town's golden sons, sons of lawyers, bankers, real estate moguls, boys who had been handed everything without question. They moved through life like they owned it, shielded by wealth, status, and parents who could smooth over any trouble with a phone call or a check. To them, the world was a playground, and anyone outside their circle was just a target for entertainment. Today, their attention had locked onto Meera O'Neill. She wasn't like the other local girls. She didn't chase attention, didn't laugh at their jokes, didn't fawn over their cars, or their party invitations. There was a quiet strength about her, something they couldn't quite name, but instinctively resented. To them she was just Big Shaq's daughter, and that alone made her a tempting mark. Carter had been the one to suggest the prank, a fun little game he'd called it. Nothing serious, just enough to remind her where she stood. His friends, eager for the thrill, had piled into his car without a second thought, grinning as they cruised the streets in search of her. They spotted her walking alone near the old football field, earbuds in, head slightly tilted down as if lost in thought. She looked calm, unbothered, her long strides purposeful. To Carter, that only fueled the challenge. He revved the engine slightly, drawing the boys' attention, and then without a word they piled out, surrounding her with lazy smiles and careless bravado. Meera paused, lifting her gaze, her expression unreadable as they closed in. "Hey, Meera," Carter drawled, tossing the baseball from hand to hand, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "What's the rush? Stay and hang out a minute." She stood still, eyes flicking over the group, her body relaxed but alert. She didn't smile, didn't offer them the satisfaction of surprise or fear. "I'm busy," she said simply, her voice calm, measured. But Carter only smirked, motioning to the others. "Aw, come on, don't be like that," Brent laughed, stepping closer. "It's just a joke." Before she could step back, they moved in, the four boys laughing as they grabbed her arms. Not roughly, not violently, but with the entitled, mocking force of boys who believed nothing they did could possibly matter. They led her, half dragging, half guiding, over to the old goalpost, pulling ropes from the back of Carter's SUV. Meera didn't struggle. She didn't shout. She let them think they were in control, her sharp mind cataloging every detail, every angle, every escape point. They tied her loosely to the pole, more for the effect than any real restraint, pulling out their phones to record, to capture the moment for the endless scroll of social media. "Look at this, guys. Big Shaq's little girl, all tied up," Chase jeered, holding up his phone, snickering as Tanner waved into the camera beside him. Carter stepped back, grinning wide. "Bet you didn't expect this today, huh, princess?" He smirked. "We're just having a little fun. Don't take it so seriously." But Meera's eyes, steady, unflinching, locked on his. There was no fear there, no panic, no pleading, just a slow, calculated assessment. She knew exactly who they were, exactly how small they were, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. Beneath her calm exterior, years of specialized training clicked into place. She was measuring her breath, timing her heart, mapping out the moment when she would flip the power back into her hands. The boys' laughter echoed across the empty field, their voices rising and falling as they joked and taunted, tossing around lazy insults and casual jabs. But slowly, a faint edge of discomfort began to slip into the group. Something about her stillness unsettled them. This wasn't how these pranks usually played out. They were used to giggles, protests, maybe even tears, but not this, not the silent, unwavering stare of someone who wasn't afraid. Brent shifted, glancing at Carter. "Hey man, maybe we should wrap this up," he muttered, half laughing. "She's just standing there, it's kinda weird." Carter snorted, brushing him off. "Relax, dude. We're just messing around." But Chase, peering into Meera's small crossbody bag they had tossed aside, suddenly froze. Guys, what's this?" His voice cracked slightly as he pulled out a slim black leather case, flipping it open to reveal a government badge. The air changed instantly. Carter's smirk faltered, his hand tightening on the baseball. Brent stepped closer, squinting at the badge, his face paling. Tanner let out a nervous laugh, trying to brush it off. "That can't be real, right? She's just messing with us." But Meera's eyes stayed locked, unwavering. And in that gaze, they saw it. The truth they had been too blind, too arrogant to consider. This wasn't just some girl they could play with. This wasn't just Shaq's daughter. They had tied up a CIA operative. Panic rippled through the group. Carter's hands trembled slightly as he ran them through his hair, pacing. "What the hell, man? What the hell is this?" Brent stepped back, glancing around nervously. "We're screwed. We are so screwed." Meera, still calm, tilted her head slightly, her lips barely curving. She wasn't smug. She wasn't gloating. But she was entirely, unmistakably, in control now. She knew how this game ended. She knew exactly when and how the tables turned. Back across town, Shaq's search had sharpened into a focused urgency. He wasn't panicking, not outwardly, but inside, every fatherly instinct was firing like an alarm. He had checked her usual spots, spoken to the neighbors, even walked through the park where she sometimes cleared her head. And now, standing at the edge of the field, he spotted something that made his chest tighten. Carter Landon's black SUV, parked near the old stadium, too far out for casual use. Without a word, Shaq started walking, his massive frame moving with quiet, deliberate purpose. On the field, the boys were unraveling, their whispers sharp and panicked. "We have to let her go. Now," Chase hissed, glancing over his shoulder. But Carter hesitated, torn between his pride and his rising fear. "We can't just—" And then they saw him. Shaq stepped onto the field, his shadow stretching long across the grass, his expression unreadable. The boys fell silent, their breath catching as the giant of a man approached. Not running, not yelling, just walking, slow and steady, eyes locked on his daughter. Meera's gaze softened for the first time, a flicker of warmth crossing her face. She knew he would come. She had known it from the start. Carter stumbled back, his bravado shattering. We didn't mean." Shaq didn't answer. He simply moved to the pole, his massive hands working calmly, steadily, untying the loose knots. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone carried all the weight, all the power. The boys could only stand there frozen, as the quiet storm they had summoned finally arrived, not with fists, not with fury, but with the unbearable, crushing weight of a father's love. And in that moment, they realized they had not just played a harmless prank. They had made a mistake they would never forget. The sun hung high, its sharp rays spilling across Shaquille O'Neal's wide front porch. But inside his home, there was a sudden, unsettling stillness. Shaq sat for a moment at the edge of his couch, his massive hands resting on his knees, his broad shoulders slightly hunched forward. A low hum filled his chest, a feeling he could not shake, the kind of restless pull only a father knows. It started as a small thought. Meera hasn't texted. She always sends a check-in when she's running late, or heading somewhere. But today, nothing. Shaq looked at his phone again, pressing the screen to refresh his messages, feeling a faint prickle at the back of his neck. He called out once, twice. Meera? No answer. The house, usually so warm with presence, felt too quiet, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. He stood, moving through the familiar spaces. The kitchen, the back patio, her room, no signs of her. The unease deepened, and with it memories flickered through his mind like a silent reel. He saw her as a little girl, her tiny hand gripping his giant fingers, as they crossed the street. Saw her as a determined teenager, tall like him, proud, pushing herself on the basketball court. He remembered the long talks they'd had, talks about the world, about being black in America, about how people might smile to your face but still see you as less. Shaq had always told her, "You're going to be bigger than this town, bigger than their small minds." But he had also warned her, gently, that no matter how strong or brilliant she was, there would be days when the world tried to cut her down just because of who she was. Meera had listened, absorbed it all, and yet carried herself with a kind of graceful defiance. He was so proud of her. And now, with the gnawing sense growing in his gut, Shaq wondered if that world, the one he had warned her about, had finally shown its teeth. He grabbed his car keys, slipping out the door with a quiet urgency. His neighbors waved as he passed, familiar faces smiling under the sun. But Shaq barely registered them. His mind was ticking fast, scanning through possibilities, connecting dots. Where would she have gone? Who was she with? He called her phone straight to voicemail. His chest tightened. It wasn't like her to disappear. Driving slowly through the neighborhood, Shaq's eyes darted left and right, taking in every corner, every shortcut she might have taken. He thought about the people in this town. Some he trusted, some he didn't. It wasn't always loud, the bias here. It was in the small things, the careful looks, the subtle distance. He remembered the time they were denied a table at a restaurant, because they were full even though half the tables sat empty. Or when a local shopkeeper followed Meera through the aisles, pretending to tidy shelves but clearly watching her every move. Shaq had always tried to shield her from the worst of it, but he knew she saw it, felt it. You can't grow up black in America and not feel it. As he drove past the local park, his phone buzzed. A message from one of his old friends at the rec center. "Hey Shaq, didn't your daughter head toward the stadium earlier?" Shaq's hands tightened on the wheel. The old stadium. No one really went out there anymore, except for the occasional skateboarding kids or high schoolers sneaking a smoke. Why would she be there? Unless... Shaq's heart began to pound, not with panic, but with a hard, controlled focus. Years in the public eye had taught him to manage emotions, to stay steady under pressure. He had faced roaring crowds, blinding cameras, business deals, charity events, all under scrutiny. But this was different. This was his family, and family to Shaq was everything. He remembered the promises he had made to himself when Meera was born. That he would protect her, guide her, be her shield against the world. He had spent years building not just a legacy, but a fortress of love around her, teaching her resilience, kindness, strength. She had grown into a woman who could handle herself. Yes, but even the strongest people can be ambushed, blindsided. Shaq pulled up to the edge of the stadium grounds, cutting the engine. The place looked deserted, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the cracked asphalt. But something in the air felt wrong, like the faint echo of laughter where there should have been silence. He stepped out, his massive frame casting its own long shadow, his heart drumming a steady, determined beat. As he moved closer, his sharp eyes caught something, a glint of movement near the old goalpost. Figures. 4 of them, small, restless, pacing nervously, and then the unmistakable silhouette. Meera, tied to the post, her head lifted, her gaze calm even from this distance. Shaq's breath caught, just for a moment, before his instinct surged forward. He didn't run, he didn't shout, he walked, every step deliberate, the earth seeming to tremble under his feet. His mind raced. Who were these boys? What had they done? But he held himself steady, because he knew This moment wasn't about fury. It was about control, about love, about showing his daughter, and them, what real power looked like. As he drew closer, he could see the panic flickering in the boys' faces, their bravado crumbling as they recognized him. Carter Landon. Shaq knew his family, knew the kind of privilege that oozed off them like cologne. These boys weren't hardened criminals. They were spoiled kids who had played a cruel game, never expecting it to have consequences. But consequences had come, towering over them, silent and immense. Shaq reached Meera, without a word, his hands moving calmly to untie her, his eyes never leaving hers. She didn't need to explain. He didn't need to ask. In that moment, their connection spoke louder than any words. A father's heart, a daughter's strength, two lives shaped by love and resilience. The boys hovered nearby, their voices low, stumbling over nervous apologies. Shaq ignored them. His focus was on Meera, on the steady, quiet way she rose once freed, brushing herself off, standing tall beside him. She was unbroken. She was unshaken. And in that Shaq felt both immense pride and a deep, aching sorrow. Sorrow that even here, even in this small town where they had built a life, the shadows of cruelty still found them. As they walked back toward the car, Shaq's arm around his daughter's shoulders, the weight of the moment settled heavy in the air. This wasn't over. Not yet. The storm was only beginning, and Shaq knew they would face it together. As they always had. As they always would. Meera O'Neill felt the rough texture of the rope press lightly against her arms. The old fibers looped lazily around her as if they were props in a high school prank, not restraints worthy of real panic. She stood still, tied to the goalpost on that forgotten football field, her breathing measured, her heart steady. The boys, Carter, Brent, Chase, Tanner circled nearby, their laughter thin, almost forced now, their phones flashing as they filmed her, nudging each other with half-hearted bravado. They had no idea, not a single clue. Inside, Meera's mind worked like a machine. She wasn't here, not really. She was running through contingency plans, escape protocols, the steps drilled into her from years in covert operations. Every moment they delayed, every time they turned their backs, she measured and logged. She wasn't a frightened young woman waiting to be rescued. She was a CIA deputy director running through her internal checklist, calmly calculating the risk, the exposure, the exact second when she would flip this whole pathetic scene on its head. She had always known it would be like this, one day. The cover she wore was thin, intentionally crafted. Her family knew only fragments, some vague mention of government service, federal contracts, a busy job in Washington. Even her father, Big Shaq, the man who knew her soul better than anyone, didn't know the truth. He had raised her to be powerful, resilient, compassionate, but he hadn't raised her into this world of shadows that had been her own nose, her own climb. She had always wanted to protect, to defend, to make her country better, even when her country barely saw her, even when it dismissed women like her, black women, as afterthoughts. And now here she was, tied up by four bored rich boys who thought they were funny. She didn't even need to activate her badge or reveal her identity to break free. She had trained for far worse. But she waited. Because timing mattered. Because exposing herself too soon risked blowing a cover she'd spent years building. Because she trusted something deeper than even her own training. She trusted her father. Meera closed her eyes briefly, inhaling slowly, letting herself remember the times Shaq had walked her home from school, when the other kids mocked her height, her hair, her name, the nights he had sat by her bed, telling her stories about greatness, not just in sports but in life, about dignity, about standing up, about knowing who you are, no matter how the world tries to define you. Her father was a man of towering presence, yes, but also a man of towering love. She had carried that love into every mission, every operation, every calculated risk she took in service of a nation that often forgot people like her existed. But love couldn't replace strategy. Her thoughts slid back to the immediate problem. These boys. Carter, the ringleader, was pacing now, his voice a little too loud as he cracked jokes that weren't landing. Brent kept glancing at her, a nervous tick in his jaw, while Chase toyed with her bag, flipping it open to rummage through. Tanner leaned on the post, pretending nonchalance, but Meera saw the tension in his shoulders. They were cracking. They didn't realize it yet, but the moment they untied her, they would shatter under the weight of what they'd done. And then, it happened. Chase froze, pulling out her slim black badge case. Guys? His voice had a hitch, a sharp edge. What is this? Carter strode over, snatching it from his hand, flipping it open. The sunlight gleamed off the seal. Central Intelligence Agency. Deputy Director. The shift was immediate. Brent swore under his breath. Tanner took a step back, eyes wide. Carter's smirk faltered, his jaw working as if trying to deny what was right in front of him. Meera stayed still, her head tilted slightly, watching them absorb the truth. No panic, no pleading, just a cold, calculating presence, sharper than any threat they'd ever faced in their coddled, sheltered lives. What is this, some kind of joke? Carter muttered, his voice cracking despite himself. Meera let the silence stretch, the weight of it pressing down on them. She didn't need to answer. The badge spoke louder than she ever could. Inside, her mind ticked forward. She could break the rope any time. It was barely a restraint, more a prop for their childish amusement. But now she had the advantage of timing. She could sense movement on the edge of the field, could feel the shift in the air that meant help was coming. And not just any help. Her father. Meera allowed herself the briefest flicker of a smile. Invisible to the boys. Shaq would come. Not because she needed rescuing, but because that's who he was. Because a father's heart knows when something is wrong, even before the facts line up. She trusted him to close the gap, to stand beside her when this storm cracked open. She remembered past missions, moments when she had faced down armed threats, navigated delicate political balances, brokered information exchanges, under crushing pressure. Compared to those, this was nothing. 4 panicking boys, and a social media prank gone wrong. But what made it dangerous was the exposure, the risk that this small local mistake could ripple outward, tearing through the carefully crafted cover she'd spent years maintaining. The suspense hung heavy as she balanced 2 truths. She could end this right now, or she could wait, hold the line, let the moment unfold exactly as it needed to. And then, on the edge of her hearing, she caught it. The familiar sound of heavy, purposeful footsteps. The faint tremble in the ground that signaled a presence unlike any other. Her father. Meera exhaled slowly, feeling her chest relax for the first time in hours. She wasn't saved. She didn't need saving. But she was seen. She was met. And that was everything. She opened her eyes fully, her gaze sharpening on the boys, as they turned, their faces blanching, recognizing the giant man approaching across the field. Carter stepped back, fumbling the badge, his cool collapsing into raw fear. Brent grabbed Chase's arm, whispering frantically. Tanner looked like he wanted to disappear. Meera stayed still, her heart steady, her mind calm. She had planned for every possibility, every threat, every contingency. But in the end, what anchored her wasn't the badge, wasn't the agency, wasn't the training. It was the simple, unbreakable truth of who she was. Meera O'Neill, daughter of Shaquille O'Neal, a woman forged in love, honed in justice, and unshakable even when the world underestimated her. As her father reached her side, hands moving to untie the useless ropes, Meera lifted her chin, her eyes flicking once, cool sharp over the trembling boys. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The real storm had arrived, and they would feel its weight without a single punch thrown. Shaquille O'Neal's massive frame moved quickly through the small town streets. But it wasn't his height or celebrity that made people step back. It was the intensity in his face, the carved line of worry between his brows, the quiet urgency radiating off his body. Shaq was known here. This was his town, or so people always claimed. They cheered him at local events, slapped his back at charity games, called him Big Shaq like they were all one big happy family. But now, as he went door to door, stopping by the bakery, the hardware store, the gas station, something colder slipped through the cracks, something he'd known his whole life but hoped just once he wouldn't have to face. Shaq ducked into Miller's Hardware, where old Mr. Miller stood behind the counter, polishing a set of garden shears. Shaq's voice was low but firm. "Hey, Mr. Miller, you seen my daughter? Meera? Tall girl, blue shirt, maybe heading toward the stadium?" Mr. Miller gave a tight-lipped smile, shaking his head a little too quickly. "Can't say I have, Shaq. Maybe she's just out with friends. You know how kids are. They wander." There was a patronizing undertone there, an easy brush-off. Shaq forced a polite nod, moving on, but the knot in his stomach twisted tighter. He crossed to the diner, pushing through the door, the little bell jingling overhead. Inside, a few regulars sat hunched over coffee, glancing up as he entered. Shaq approached the counter, asking the waitress if she'd seen Meera. She fidgeted, glancing toward the back. Sorry, hon. Haven't seen her. Maybe check the park. Again, the same easy dismissal. Shaq felt it, not just the surface-level indifference, but the edge beneath it, the silent expectation that he not make a fuss, not cause a stir, not turn his private concern into their public problem. Stepping outside, Shaq exhaled slowly, trying to loosen the tightness coiled in his chest. He wasn't new to this. He had faced it in the NBA, in boardrooms, on television sets, the double standard, the unspoken rules, the constant need to stay composed. He had always been careful, always measured, knowing that anger would only confirm what some people already wanted to believe about him. But this wasn't about him anymore. This was about Meera, and the longer she was missing, the louder his instincts roared. As he moved down the street, he spotted Officer Jennings leaning against his patrol car near the town square. Shaq approached quickly, explaining the situation, his voice steady but edged with urgency. Jennings listened, arms crossed, nodding slightly. Look, Shaq, I'm sure she's fine. You know how kids are, probably just off somewhere with friends. No need to jump to conclusions. The words hung heavy in the air. Shaq felt the weight of them, the subtle implication that he was overreacting, that his concern was exaggerated. No offense, Jennings added, but you people do get a little worked up sometimes. Shaq's jaw tightened, his massive hands curling briefly at his sides before he forced them to relax. He had heard that phrase before, you people. A thin blade of condescension disguised as casual conversation. He didn't have time to argue, didn't have the luxury of correcting ignorance right now. He just needed answers. He thanked Jennings curtly, and kept moving, cutting across town toward the small park where kids often gathered. On the way, he passed a group of teenagers sitting on a low wall, their phones glowing in their hands. Shaq stopped, towering over them. Anyone seen Meera? He asked, his deep voice carrying just enough force to snap them out of their screens. One of the teens, a girl with sharp eyes, hesitated. I think I saw her walking toward the old stadium, she murmured. Shaq's heart jolted. You sure? The girl nodded slowly. She was alone. Without wasting a second, Shaq turned on his heel, his long strides eating up the pavement. He felt the familiar burn of adrenaline, but underneath it was something heavier, not fear, exactly, but a bone-deep ache. He thought of every lesson he had tried to pass down to Meera, every warning about how the world saw them, how even in a place that claimed to love you, there were always eyes waiting for you to slip, always people quick to dismiss your pain. His mind raced as he pieced together the fragments. The dismissive shopkeepers, the indifferent officer, the scattered sightings. She had been walking alone, moving toward the stadium. But why? And who had followed her? Shaq didn't know yet, but his gut, his hardwired father's instinct, told him one thing: she hadn't gone there by choice. As he neared the edge of town, the stadium loomed into view, its once grandstands now weathered and crumbling. The old goalposts stood like skeletal sentries against the fading sky. Shaq slowed, his senses sharpening. From this distance the place seemed deserted, but he knew better than to trust appearances. He circled wide, moving quietly despite his size, scanning the edges of the field. And then he saw it. A flash of movement. A group of boys, restless, pacing near the far goalpost. And at the center, tall, composed, unmistakable, Meera, tied loosely, her posture calm, her head lifted. Shaq's breath caught, his chest tightening with a surge of emotion that almost buckled his knees. Rage, relief, love, all tangled together. But he didn't let it spill out. He stayed steady, his mind clicking into focus. This wasn't the moment to explode. This was the moment to move, to reclaim, to remind the world exactly who he was. As he stepped onto the field, the boys turned, their faces draining of color, as they recognized him. Shaq felt the ripple of their panic, the way their bravado shrank to nothing under the weight of his presence. But he didn't care about them right now. His eyes were on Meera, and hers, sharp and unwavering, met his with a flicker of quiet triumph. He reached her side, his hands working the ropes, his fingers gentle but sure. The boys hovered nearby, stammering, tripping over apologies. Shaq ignored them. His focus was his daughter, the steady rise and fall of her breath, the unshakable strength she radiated even now. As the last knot came free, Meera straightened, brushing off her arms, her chin lifted. Shaq felt a swell of fierce pride, but also an ache deep in his chest. They had made it through this moment. Yes. But the road ahead, the conversations, the reckoning, was just beginning. Together father and daughter turned, walking away from the shaken boys, leaving behind a field heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Shaq knew they would face questions, maybe even media storms, but he also knew one thing for certain: they would face it as they always had, side by side, grounded in love, unbroken by the world around them. The sun hung heavy over the abandoned football field, its golden light stretching long shadows across the cracked grass. Carter Landon paced nervously, his sneakers grinding against dry dirt, as he shot quick glances toward his friends. Brent leaned against the old bleachers, arms crossed tightly over his chest, chewing his thumbnail, eyes darting back to where Meera O'Neill sat calmly, tied to the goalpost. Tanner kicked at a stray soda can, the metallic clang breaking the silence, while Chase fidgeted with Mara's crossbody purse, his fingers digging around absent-mindedly, until they brushed something smooth, something unexpected. Carter's nerves were starting to fray, though he wouldn't show it. Not yet. It was supposed to be a joke, a harmless, stupid prank. They'd tie her up, get a few laughs, maybe post a video to show their friends that even Big Shaq's daughter wasn't above their games. But now, standing here in the thickening quiet, Carter felt an unease creeping in. Something wasn't right. Meera hadn't begged. She hadn't shouted or pleaded, or tried to reason with them. She had just watched with a kind of unsettling calm, her dark eyes steady, her expression unreadable. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't fear. It was something else, something Carter couldn't quite put his finger on, a level of control they were used to seeing only in adults, in people who held real power. And suddenly, her stillness felt less like submission and more like calculation. Brent broke the silence first, his voice thin. "Dude, maybe we should cut her loose. This is getting weird." Tanner looked up quickly, his face pale. "Yeah man, she's not even fighting. It's freaking me out." Carter forced a smirk, pushing his nerves down. "Relax. We're just messing around." But even as he spoke, his voice felt hollow in his own ears. And then Chase, rummaging deeper into Meera's purse, froze. His hand pulled out a slim, black leather case, the kind none of them recognized, embossed with a gold federal seal. His brows furrowed as he flipped it open, and then his face drained of all color. "Guys," he whispered, his voice cracking, "you need to see this." The others crowded around, eyes widening as they stared at the badge inside. Deputy Director, CIA, Meera O'Neill. For a beat, none of them spoke, the words locking tight in their throats. Carter snatched the badge from Chase's trembling hands, squinting as if hoping he was reading it wrong. "No way, no freaking way," he muttered, shaking his head. But there it was, unmistakable, undeniable. Not just Big Shaq's daughter, not just some tall, confident girl from town, a federal agent, high-ranking, dangerous. A ripple of panic surged through the group. Brent's breath quickened, his voice shooting up a notch. "What the hell, man? We're dead. We are so dead." Tanner's hands went to his head, fingers gripping his hair as he let out a shaky laugh, the sound cracking at the edges. "She's gonna ruin us, man. She's gonna ruin all of us." Carter backed away a few steps, heart hammering in his chest. His mind raced through possible outs, possible excuses, but nothing came. They'd crossed a line so far they couldn't even see the edge anymore. This wasn't a school prank or a viral stunt. This was federal level, career-ending, life-changing territory. Meanwhile, tied calmly to the pole, Meera lifted her gaze, meeting Carter's eyes with a look that sent an involuntary shiver down his spine. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk or spit threats. She just warned. Her eyes alone, sharp and steady, delivered the message. "You have no idea what you've done." Carter turned frantic now, his voice snapping. Untie her, right now." But as Brent and Tanner scrambled toward the pole, they froze, because they saw what Carter couldn't yet. Over the rise, a familiar, enormous figure was approaching, slow and deliberate, each step echoing like a drumbeat across the empty field. Shaq. The boys stiffened, their faces draining to white. Carter whipped around, his stomach plummeting as he saw the towering silhouette. "Oh my God," Brent whispered, backing up. "We are so screwed." Panic rippled harder now, not the shallow panic of getting caught by a parent, but the deeper, sinking dread, of realizing they had stepped into something much bigger, much darker, than they had ever imagined. Shaq wasn't storming toward them, wasn't running or shouting. He walked with the kind of slow, heavy power that made the ground seem to tremble, his broad frame casting long shadows across the field. His face was carved in stone, his eyes locked on Meera, his daughter, his world. Carter felt his knees weaken. "We didn't mean to," he stammered, barely able to get the words out. "It was just a joke." But even as he said it, he knew how pathetic it sounded. Shaq reached Meera without a word, his hands moving with practiced calm to untie the loose ropes. Meera stood, brushing herself off, her eyes never leaving the boys. There was no need for raised voices, no need for threats. The silence was its own punishment, heavier and more suffocating than anything Carter had ever faced. For the first time in his life, Carter Landon understood what real power looked like, and it wasn't loud, and it wasn't showy, and it wasn't wrapped in the privilege he had always taken for granted. It was quiet. It was steady. It was the kind of power that came from knowing exactly who you are, from standing on a foundation so strong no one can shake it. As Shaq and Meera turned, walking away, Carter felt a raw, hollow pit open inside his chest. He could hear Tanner muttering beside him, hear Brent's shaky breaths, hear Chase cursing under his breath. But none of it mattered. They were small now, exposed, their arrogance peeled away like cheap paint. And as the sun dipped lower, casting long golden rays across the field, Carter knew that no apology, no excuse, no last-minute scramble could undo what they had done. The storm had arrived, and they were standing helpless in its path. Shaquille O'Neal's massive silhouette crested the edge of the football field, his figure backlit by the dipping sun, casting a long, commanding shadow across the cracked grass. Every slow, deliberate step he took pulled the air tighter, the space around him narrowing into a thick, weighted silence. The boys didn't see him at first. Carter was still spinning in frantic circles, muttering half-formed plans to Brent and Tanner, while Chase paced near the goalpost, gripping his hair in both hands. But Meera, her dark eyes lifted calmly, and for the first time that afternoon, a flicker of softness crossed her face. She had known he would come, not because she needed him to rescue her. She was fully capable of freeing herself, but because she knew his heart, his instincts, his unwavering commitment to family. Shaq was here because that's who he was, the man who showed up, every time, no matter the cost. Carter's voice cracked, sharp and panicked. "We have to fix this. Maybe if we—" His words died mid-sentence, as Brent's wide, terrified eyes locked past him, staring over his shoulder. Slowly, Carter turned, the color draining from his face, as he finally saw Shaq moving toward them. The boys froze, their small, privileged bodies caught like animals under a predator's gaze. But Shaq didn't look at them, not yet. His eyes were locked on Meera, drinking in every detail. The way she stood tall, the calm in her face, the loose ropes at her wrists, his giant hands clenched briefly at his sides, a wave of emotion surging through him. But he didn't let it spill out. Not anger, not yet. There was something far heavier, far sharper than rage filling him now. Something quieter, but far more devastating. He reached the goalpost, his enormous hands moving gently to the knots, fingers working them loose with steady, practiced care. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His presence alone radiated a force that spoke louder than any words. As he untied Meera, she didn't flinch or rush. She simply stood still, letting her father reclaim what was his to protect. The boys hovered a few feet away, eyes darting nervously, their breath sharp and shallow. Tanner whispered something to Brent, who shook his head quickly, his face pale. Chase mumbled, "We're screwed, man," over and over, under his breath, like a broken record. Carter tried to square his shoulders, tried to hold on to some shred of the cocky, untouchable boy he had always been, but even he knew it was over. Shaq turned slightly, his gaze sweeping toward them at last, and the weight of it hit like a sledgehammer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't take a single threatening step. But in that look, steady, unblinking, vast, they felt the full gravity of what they had done. This was a man they had seen on TV, larger than life, a champion, a celebrity. But standing here up close, stripped of the arena lights and the cameras, Shaq wasn't a symbol or a persona. He was a father, and that truth, raw, fierce, immovable, hit harder than any fist ever could. Carter opened his mouth, trying to explain. trying to scrape together an apology or an excuse, but no sound came out. Brent's shoulders sagged as he realized there was no hiding, no slipping away. Tanner shifted from foot to foot, his eyes darting toward the parking lot like he was considering bolting. Chase stood frozen, his knuckles white where they gripped the strap of Meera's purse. Shaq didn't bother to acknowledge their stammering. He rested one large hand on Meera's shoulder, guiding her gently away from the post. She straightened fully beside him, her chin lifted, her body radiating quiet strength. Together they turned, walking slowly toward the edge of the field. They didn't rush. They didn't look back. Behind them, the boys crumbled in slow motion. Carter sank onto the grass, burying his head in his hands. Brent let out a shaky breath, his knees buckling slightly. Tanner let out a nervous, strangled laugh that died on his lips when Chase shot him a look of raw panic. None of them had expected this. None of them had imagined that the man they mocked from a distance, the father they thought of as just a big, smiling celebrity, could hold this kind of quiet, shattering power. It wasn't the threat of violence. Shaq didn't need that. It was the unbearable force of shame, the crushing realization of how deeply they had miscalculated, how recklessly they had underestimated both Meera and her father. As Shaq and Meera reached the edge of the field, the last rays of sunlight catching in their hair, the world seemed to hold its breath. There was no dramatic showdown, no furious outburst, no thrown punches or shouted threats, just the echoing silence of a lesson learned the hard way, one that would leave a mark on the boys far deeper than any physical punishment ever could. Shaq paused at the sidewalk, glancing once at Meera, his eyes softening for just a moment. She gave him a small, steady nod, a signal that she was okay, that she was still standing, still herself. He let out a slow, quiet breath, the tension in his chest loosening slightly. He had known she was strong, known she was more than capable of defending herself, but still, seeing her bound, seeing what these boys had dared to do, had carved a sharp ache through his heart. Meera touched his arm lightly, her gaze flicking once, briefly, over her shoulder. Shaq followed her glance, his eyes landing one final time on the boys crumpled at the far end of the field. There was no gloating in his face, no satisfaction, only a deep, heavy sorrow, the kind that comes when you realize that even in a world that claims to admire you, to celebrate you, there are still those who will try to diminish you, to humiliate you, just because they think they can. Without a word, the father and daughter turned away, their footsteps steady, their shadows long across the pavement. They didn't need to speak. The truth of the moment, the sharp, aching weight of it, spoke for them. And as they walked side by side into the fading light, they carried with them not just the memory of what had happened, but the unshakable bond that would carry them through whatever came next. The air outside the old football field buzzed with tension, even after Shaq and Meera walked away from the scene. Word had spread fast, faster than either of them expected. Within an hour, cars lined the streets, neighbors poured out of their homes, and parents arrived in frantic waves, tugging Carter, Brent, Tanner, and Chase aside, scolding in hushed tones, throwing panicked glances toward Shaq's towering silhouette. The town had come to witness the aftermath, but no one yet knew the storm they were standing in the middle of. Meera stood quietly beside her father, near the edge of the field, her arms folded across her chest, her gaze locked not on the boys, but on the adults, the mothers and fathers who had raised them, the shopkeepers and officers who had dismissed Shaq's concerns earlier that day, the community that had always believed itself friendly, fair, open. She saw the cracks now, as clear as daylight, and she knew this was the moment to break cover. Shaq placed one large hand gently on her shoulder. His eyes, filled with a complex mix of love and hurt, searched her face. "You sure?" he rumbled softly, his voice low enough for only her to hear. Meera gave the smallest nod, a flicker of resolve tightening her features. She had kept her double life secret for so long, to protect him, to protect herself. But today the line had been crossed. Today the town needed to face a truth much bigger than the O'Neill family. Stepping forward, Meera raised her voice, not with anger, but with a steady, practiced calm that carried across the field. Conversations quieted, eyes turned, and soon, the crowd stilled, a sea of tense faces waiting, wondering what came next. "My name," she began, her voice even, "is Meera O'Neill. I am a deputy director at the Central Intelligence Agency." A ripple passed through the crowd. Audible gasps, muttered disbelief. Some parents clutched their sons' shoulders tighter. Some neighbors exchanged wide-eyed glances. But Meera didn't pause. She stood taller, shoulders squared, every inch the trained operative she was. I have spent the last 5 years working on operations you'll never hear about. Counterintelligence, national security, international threats most people don't know exist. My job is to keep this country safe, even when that country doesn't always see me, doesn't always believe I belong in the rooms I stand in, or the roles I carry. Her eyes swept the boys, but she wasn't speaking only to them now. She was speaking to everyone, to the mothers who said boys will be boys, to the fathers who taught their sons entitlement, masked as confidence, to the shopkeepers who ignored Shaq's questions earlier, dismissing him as an overreacting black father, not a man whose instincts were sharper and truer than they ever realized. I know what some of you think when you look at me, Meera continued, her voice tightening just slightly, though her composure held. You see my height, my skin, my name, and you assume you know my story. You assume you know my worth. But you don't. You never did. And today, your sons made the mistake of thinking I was small. They thought I was just the daughter of a local celebrity. They thought they could humiliate me without consequence, that my calm meant I was powerless. She let the words hang for a beat, sharp and heavy. They were wrong. Behind her, Shaq stood silent, his massive presence a wall of quiet support. His heart ached, not because he doubted her, but because he understood the cost of this moment. He understood what it meant for her to stand here, to lay herself bare, to step out of the protective cover she had so carefully maintained. His pride swelled in his chest, fierce and almost painful, but so did his sorrow. A father's love carried both. Meera's voice softened slightly, as she continued. This isn't about revenge. I'm not here to ruin anyone's life. But I am here to force this town to look in the mirror, to ask why it was so easy to laugh when a black girl stood tied to a pole, to ask why her father's search was brushed off as paranoia, to ask why these boys thought they could play this game and walk away clean. She turned, her gaze sweeping across the stunned parents. Look at your sons, she said quietly. Ask yourself what you've taught them, or failed to teach them about respect, about boundaries, about the difference between a prank and an attack. Ask yourself why they assumed no one would hold them accountable. A rustle moved through the crowd, an uncomfortable shifting. Some parents lowered their eyes. Some boys began to squirm under their parents' grips. But Meera didn't waver. I fight for this country, she said simply. Every day, even when it doesn't fight for me, even when it looks past women like me, even when it underestimates the weight I carry. I have stood in rooms where life and death decisions are made, where the future of this nation hangs in the balance. And today, I stood tied to a pole because 4 boys decided I was just a girl they could humiliate for fun. Her voice dropped to a razor-sharp softness. Think about that. For a long moment, no one moved. The crowd hung frozen in the heavy stillness, caught between shock and reckoning. Shaq's hand pressed lightly to Meera's back, a quiet reassurance. He wanted to pull her into his arms, shield her from the rawness of this confrontation. But he knew she didn't need shielding. She needed space. She needed to finish. Drawing one last deep breath, Meera straightened fully. I won't press charges, she said calmly, because this moment, right here, is punishment enough. Let them carry this. Let them live with the knowledge that they underestimated the wrong person. And let this town live with the knowledge that it still has work to do. With that, she stepped back, her gaze never faltering. Shaq opened his arm, and she moved into his side, resting briefly against him as they turned away. Together they began to walk, leaving behind the boys, the parents, the crowd still grappling with the aftermath of truths laid bare. As they walked into the fading light, Shaq felt his throat tighten. His daughter had just stood before an entire town, stripped of her cover, laid bare her strength, her pain, her defiance, and she had done it not with fists or fury, but with clarity, with grace, with an unwavering sense of self. His heart ached with both hurt and hope, because in this moment, he knew, Meera wasn't just his daughter. She was her own storm. Morning came heavy over the small Florida town, but no one woke to a peaceful sunrise. By dawn, news trucks lined the streets, cameras flashing outside the old football field. Reporters clustered outside City Hall, and the names O'Neill and CIA were already trending across every social media platform. What had begun as a local prank gone wrong had exploded overnight into a national conversation. But the town itself, the people who had watched this unfold with their own eyes, weren't thinking about headlines or hashtags. They were thinking about themselves, about what this moment had exposed, what it demanded they face. Inside the Landon house, Carter's parents were in chaos, pacing in tight circles, making frantic calls to lawyers, publicists, school administrators, anyone they could reach. Carter sat slumped at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, eyes swollen and red. His father hissed, "You don't understand, Carter. This could ruin everything." His mother's voice cracked as she snapped, "We can't spin this away. This is federal. She's CIA." But none of their words landed. Carter wasn't hearing them. All he could hear was the heavy, suffocating silence of Shaquille O'Neal standing over him, the crushing weight of what it had felt like to be so small, so powerless in front of someone who hadn't even needed to raise his voice. Down the block, Brent's parents knocked on the O'Neal's front door, flanked by Tanner's and Chase's mothers, all clutching homemade pies, gift baskets, hastily scribbled apology notes. But the door stayed closed. Shaq and Meera weren't interested in quick apologies. This wasn't about smoothing things over, making nice, pretending nothing had happened. This was about the town looking itself squarely in the mirror, and not looking away. By midday, the mayor called an emergency town meeting at the community center, the very place where just the day before Shaq had been laughing and shaking hands. The beloved local hero, the gentle giant, everyone adored, until they decided his concern wasn't worth their attention. The room filled with townspeople, shopkeepers, teachers, coaches, families. Reporters hovered outside the doors, recording every shift, every whisper. On the small stage, Shaq and Meera sat side by side, their presence alone enough to command absolute silence. The mayor cleared his throat nervously, his face pale under the harsh overhead lights. We want to extend our deepest apologies to the O'Neal family," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "What happened yesterday was unacceptable." Shaq's massive frame remained still, his face calm but unreadable. Meera, dressed in a crisp, dark blazer, leaned forward slightly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it cut sharper than any raised shout. "This isn't just about what those boys did," Meera said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "It's about what allowed them to think they could do it." The room tensed. Mothers shifted in their seats. Fathers crossed their arms. Teachers looked down at their laps. Meera continued, her tone steady. "It's about the jokes you don't call out, the dismissive attitudes you let pass, the assumptions you make when someone like me walks into a room, or when someone like my father asks for help." Shaq turned his head slightly, his eyes flicking across the crowd, eyes that had seen years of microaggressions, quiet slights, smiling dismissals. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone reminded them of every time they had brushed him aside, every time they had told themselves he was just an athlete, just a celebrity, just a black man making noise. Meera leaned in. "Racism isn't always loud. It's not always a slur, or a fight, or a threat. Sometimes it's in the way you laugh off what should scare you. Sometimes it's in the way you tell someone they're overreacting. Sometimes it's in the way you assume your sons couldn't possibly cross a line, until they do." Carter's mother let out a soft, choked sob in the back row. Tanner's father squeezed his wife's hand hard, but Meera didn't flinch. She knew this wasn't about comforting them. This was about making them sit with the discomfort they'd avoided for years. The mayor shifted awkwardly, his voice thin. "We will be launching a formal investigation. There will be community trainings, outreach programs. We want to be better." Shaq exhaled slowly, his chest rising, and falling with a deep, heavy breath. When he finally spoke, his voice rumbled low, calm, but undeniably powerful. "You can't fix this with a workshop," he said quietly. "You fix it by teaching your kids to see people fully, by holding them accountable, by looking at yourselves, at your own blind spots, and asking why you let them grow this wide." The room stayed frozen, the air thick, the weight of his words pressing down like a stone. Meera straightened, her shoulders square, her voice softening only slightly. "We're not here to destroy anyone," she said, "but we're also not here to let you off the hook. You have to sit with this. You have to decide what kind of community you want to be, not just when the cameras are here, but when they're gone." There were no cheers, no applause, just a deep, unsettling silence, as the townspeople sat in the thick of their own reckoning, realizing, maybe for the first time, that being good people wasn't enough, that smiles and friendly waves, didn't erase the undercurrents of bias and privilege that had shaped their children, their town, their everyday lives. When the meeting ended, reporters swarmed the O'Neills as they exited the building, cameras flashing, microphones shoved forward. Shaq lifted one massive hand, shaking his head once. No statements, no headlines. This wasn't about spectacle, it was about something far quieter, far harder, real change. Father and daughter walked side by side through the crowd, their heads held high, their backs straight. They didn't need to say anything to each other. The bond between them pulsed strong, unbroken, forged in years of love and challenge, of hard-earned respect. Shaq's hand rested briefly on Meera's back, a quiet gesture of pride, of awe, of unspoken emotion. Behind them, the town stood still, watching, grappling with the sharp, lingering truth that some wounds weren't fixed with apologies or handshakes or hurried promises. Some wounds demanded reflection, discomfort, the long, painful work of unlearning. As the O'Neills walked away, the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting their long shadows across the pavement. They moved forward together, not as victims, not as symbols, but as two people who had stood in the heart of a storm and come through, unbroken, carrying the weight of their truth into whatever came next. If this story gripped you, keep watching for more powerful truth-twisting narratives that challenge what we assume about family, identity, and justice. We're here to deliver stories that don't flinch, that peel back the surface and expose what really matters. Every tale we share pulls you deeper into moments that reflect not just characters, but us all. Stay with us, because the next story might just be the one that changes how you see everything.